planned summit of Eastern European nations in Israel, now canceled over an interview on I-24 News. To remind you, with tension already high between Israel and Poland, Israel's acting foreign minister, Yisrael Katz, was right here in our studio yesterday on day one of the job. The son of Holocaust survivors himself, Katz commented on Polish involvement in the Holocaust. Here's a little bit of what he told us and what the Polish prime minister had to say in response.
And there were many Poles who collaborated with the Nazis. That's what Yitzhak Shamir said. They murdered his father, the Poles. He said the Poles suckle anti-Semitism from their mother's breast. No one will tell us how to express ourselves and remember the fallen.
I've made this decision because words uttered by the newly appointed Israeli foreign minister, Mr. Katz, are totally unacceptable, not only in diplomacy, but in my opinion, also in the public sphere. In World War II, Poles were the nation that suffered most besides Jews and the Roma.
Joining me here in the studio is Zvi Ravner, former Israeli ambassador to Poland. Zvi, thanks very much for being here. Let's talk, first of all, about what you just heard from Katz. That was a clip of what he told us. Was he really out of line, in your view, in the way that the Polish prime minister and the Polish nation seem to feel?
Well, our new foreign minister, Katz, have used very old and very much discussed before saying by the late Prime Minister Shamir about the Poles and anti-Semitism. Look, this is not a new discussion about the Polish anti-Semitism, about the behavior of the Poles during the Second World War, etc., etc. They have their narrative, we have our narrative. It has been discussed before. It has been widely and very vividly discussed last year against the background of the Polish law that was corrected, that was changed, luckily, and we went on building up.
Law that was meant to criminalize. Attributing essentially complicity to the Polish people, to the Polish government for the Holocaust.
But still, look, the discussion was going on and will go on in the future about the role of the Poles. And frankly, I have to say, actually, if you examine the role of all nations of Europe during Second World War and the Holocaust, you may arrive at the conclusion that the Nazis managed to carry out this terrible Holocaust and destruction of Jewish people with the help of actually almost all the countries and nations and people of Europe, more or less, Poles and others. Poles have their own case. They were occupied. They have 3 million people. Almost 7,000 Poles have saved Jews, the largest number of righteous among the nations, etc. So they have their case. We went through that before. What happened now and what was therefore I think it was really wholly unnecessary and ill-timed. We had just last week we had a very good, successful, quite historic conference in Warsaw. Warsaw hosted it. Iran was discussed, Middle East, 60 countries, many Arab nations, of course, together with the Americans. It was definitely an achievement for Israel, for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And at the end of that week, what have we ended with? Again, ongoing discussion about the past.
You're saying that this has been rehashed, and yet we see that in the case of the Prime Minister's remarks a few days ago, a 3-letter word, did he say the or did he not, are enough to cause extreme outrage in Poland.
Yes, the Poles are sensitive. That's correct. Justifiably or unjustifiably, they are sensitive, and we may allow ourselves also to take into account and into consideration their sensitivities as well, especially when we were about to achieve another very important breakthrough in our international relations, the Visegrad summit. For the first time out of these countries, these 4 countries, Poland included, and all the 3, the Czech, the Hungarians, and the Slovak, whatever the history, today, currently, these are the best friends of Israel in the European Union. Why to spoil it? Why to do something? Why to go back into that however important, however sensitive. But why was it necessary to go back, and to undermine
to bring it up for the reaction?
And the summit, to undermine the summit here in Israel, in Jerusalem.
So here's my question.
Why?
So let's talk about this summit. So as you mentioned, this was supposed to get underway tomorrow. First time historic summit. As of now, 3 of the prime ministers are going to come, but just for bilateral meetings, a much sort of lower level. What do you think was lost, and what do you say to those who say that Netanyahu shouldn't necessarily be engaging some of these leaders in the first place, like Hungary, for example?
Look, it's very easy to say we shouldn't engage these because of their history, those because of their current policies. We are not in a position to be so much choosy and to preach morals to the whole world. These are good friends of Israel. We don't have to agree to everything they say. Now, and I have one more thing I have to say. And this is also because personally I was involved 12 years ago. It so happened that I, at the time as a head of department of Eastern Europe, I joined for the first time as a representative of Israel, low level, at this Visegrad conference in Prague. For the first time at my level. Since then it went up and up and up, upgraded to the level of Prime Minister 2 years ago in Budapest, and this year for the first time that they were going out of Europe and meeting here in Jerusalem. Really unprecedented achievement. So it is very, very disappointing that because of the old discussions, this conference was spoiled, undermined, unnecessary. Really, I'm sorry, unnecessary. Holocaust important, but history important, but we cannot conduct our policies only according to that.
History is important, but the future and the present is even more important. From what you say, I guess both sides should be listening to that. Ambassador Zvi Ravner.